allow me to welcome our distinguished and eminent speaker of tonight, Rahul Balu. Rahul is currently working with Amazon as a senior UX designer for the seller space. Previous to Amazon, he has worked with Microsoft, eBay, and ClearTrip. Rahul has always been drawn to the e-commerce space as it is always evolving and changing. He holds a postgraduate diploma in design for digital experience from National Institute of Design and completed his executive general management program from Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. A very warm welcome to you, Rahul. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here with us tonight. Handing the session over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot for the lovely introduction, Sama. So let's get started. Okay.
Rahul, let me know when you want to run the poll. Maybe post your introduction, we can do that.
Yeah. Okay. So if we just get started. So welcome everybody to the session. Thanks a lot for taking out time on a Thursday evening, from 9:30 to 10:30, if you're in India zone and all the other zones also taking out time to come and, be a part of this session. So my name is Rahul. I hope, I think the session would be pretty interesting. I'm looking for a lot of questions and a lot of interactions throughout. So a little bit of quick introduction about me. I finished my visual arts, Bachelor of Fine Arts in 2010. Then I worked as a junior graphic designer for a year. Then I went in my post-graduation in National Institute of Design. Then I did my internship with ClearTrip. So then post that, I worked with eBay for a year and eBay shut operations in India. So then I've moved to Microsoft. So then I moved to Amazon. So, from 2016 onwards, I'm with Amazon, and recently I finished my executive MBA.
So quite a few of the audience is working in another field. Audience, please go ahead and, feel free to comment in the chat window and let us know which field are you in.
Yeah, for every session, what I do is I basically start off with a video because it kind of tends to break the monotony, kind of gets people a little interested also. Just let me know if you can hear the audio. Yeah.
When people think of design, they often think.
Are you guys able to hear the audio?
Yes, Rahul, we can hear you.
Okay.
When people think of design, they often think an elegant chair, a well-turned logo, dramatic architecture. But that isn't all that design is. Design is more. It's more than the drapes or the drop shadows, more than a beautiful UI or a rad concept car. Design is more than aesthetics, much more. Design is fundamental. It's the predilection to investigate and understand. It's the compulsion to give form to ideas and make sense of disorder. Design is the ability to amend the imperfect. Design is knowing what questions to ask and how to ask them. What's the right problem to solve? How do I solve it? Why should I solve it? In a world in which anyone can now build anything, design is understanding whether something is worth building at all. If you've ever built, tested, shipped, debugged, rebuilt, or reshipped anything, then you're a designer. And there has never been a better moment in history to be a designer. Now is your time to solve real and important problems, to start great and enduring companies, to use curiosity, creativity, and craft to elevate lives. Because design at its core is optimistic. It's the call to change what is into what ought to be. It is the attempt to make heart and mind into tools of mass construction, to build a better, wiser, more just, more beautiful world. Design is your gift and your responsibility. Design is the way.
Cool. So I'll take 5 seconds of silence for an S and I'll move on to the next part. So we spoke about probably in the video you saw a bunch of things happening. There's a lot of people coming together, like, sticking post-its, like, scribbling something or coding something and everything, like, but most of us, like, as in the video, it says, like, if you have shipped, created or debugged or done anything, like, you are a designer in itself. Like, and like, that comes to the topic of, like, that brings us to the topic of, if you're a designer, like, you want to focus on a certain part of design, which is the user experience design. What exactly user experience design means? User experience design is nothing but, like, when a person is, interacting with a certain interface, like, how is he feeling? Like, I mean, how is the interface giving him that response, that touch and the context, like, so, I mean, you guys can read the, like, description, whatever is put in the thing, like, it's like, user experience is abbreviated as UX, is how a person feels interfacing with the system. The system could be a website, a web application, software. In modern context, generally denoted by a form of human-computer interaction. So everything what we interact on day-to-day basis is a form of a computer. Like, it has come from a certain system, like, either be it your smartwatch, be it your iPad, be it your phone. It's a smaller version of, like, a computer, like, and let's see, like, how we can go about creating a better experience. And you often come across this question, like, hey, is UI equal to UX? And you will come, and there is this one other connotation also, you get this job post, like, it says, like, UI/UX. So what exactly is UI and what exactly is UX? This complete question keeps coming up. So, UX is nothing but like, a comprehension of a lot of fields put together. So UX is nothing, like, it's like, let's say that, like, you're designing a product. Let's say you can take example of a food delivery. Like, user experience will start from the point of view of, like, how are you going to advertise the product, how it is going to reach, like, which is the graphics, the signages, everything what you're going to put outside. Then, like, how you're going to get the user to sign up for a flow, like, either via a computer, which is the human computer interaction part. Then if the human computer interaction is there, like, how are you going to convey it in the back end to the system? Like, there has to be an architecture built in to connect the, people who prepare food and people who require the food. Like, that's the core architecture of it. So then you require a certain kind of industrial design element, like, where there has to be a package, there has to be a shipment label, there has to be a navigation part, like, so all these things kind of come together. These compromises of the overall, what do you call it, user experience, right? I mean, like, in a very simple term, if I have to say, it's right from the point of view of, like, when a guy is coming to give you a food delivery, the logo, I mean, like, how the logo is placed in his t-shirt, like, how, I mean, like, what is the visibility of the logo? Everything comes under user experience, in a broader context. Yeah. So, and the core difference between UI and UX is, like, the UI part is basically the interaction part, whatever you're going to look at, like, the interaction design, the human computer interaction. The interface part where you interact with is going to be the interface design, which is mentioned here. If you see, like, the interface design element. So this is where actually the UI part is. So if somebody asks you a question, like, hey, I want to do only, like, UI, I don't want UX, like, then they're meaning something else, like, they're not looking for an overall full-fledged solution. So probably the next slide kind of talks about the difference between, like, what exactly is UX and what exactly is UI. So UX would compromise of a larger purview of, like, user research analysis, design ideation, and, like, you would focus on it till the execution. UI focuses on very few elements, like, hey, especially the modes what you have, like, let's say you have a mobile phone, like, inside the mobile phone, what are the things going to come, like, hey, how the visually it is going to look, and how the buttons are going to look, and when a person purchases, what is the kind of feedback it is going to show. So these are the kind of elements which compromises in the UI part. So if there are any questions, like, feel free to like, ask in the chat. If I'm going a little fast also, please let me know. Yeah, cool. So let's get into the role of what exactly a UX designer would do. Like, like, as a UX designer, like, your first and foremost job would be, like, coming up with a lot of new ideas for user problems. How do you identify the user problem? The user problem you will be able to identify through doing user research, like, and then, like, after doing, I mean, how do you connect user research? Like, you bunch of, like, you prepare a bunch of questions, like, you go ask the users, like, and you understand, like, what are the pain points, what are the problems, what are the things they have. And then from there, you come back and, like, start sketching out ideas, then designing work. I mean, like, those ideas translate into wireframes, the wireframes translate into mockups, the mockup translate into prototype, then the end product comes out. So typically, if you see, like, what's happening here in the right hand side, the picture, what I put, it's like a ideation session, what we call, like, after we understand the user concerns and, like, the user things, like, we come together, like, we put together, hey, this is the panel, what we would want to do. And these are the kind of ideation. If you go to any UX design studio, you typically, like, have something like you would see a lot of post-its or, like, whiteboarding happening, because a lot of the process, especially in the starting stages, would happen in the offline mode. When I say offline mode, like, it is basically happen in pencil sketches, post-its, like, or, like, a lot of collaboration happens in the initial level. Then as the process becomes more refined and refined, the designers take it over and, like, start working on their own. And, like, why start a career in UX design? Like, since I saw, like, a lot of you are familiar, I mean, are familiar with the term UX, but, like, what is the reason behind you? I mean, like, is there a hook? Like, why is it important for me to be a designer at this particular point of time? Like, as like, post the COVID crisis, like, everything is moved into digital, and it's like, we have seen a heavy, tremendous growth in, like, anything and everything we do, like, starting from e-commerce platform to services, like, you would be hearing the services for urban club being advertised everywhere, like, car mechanics, everything is kind of moving into online. And one of the core differentiators, like, all these platforms and everything everybody have, is the UX part of it. Like, how good the product is designed, like, how well it kind of takes care of, the needs of the users, so that kind of makes a, like, large part of, like, your experience, how you're going to purchase, or, like, how you're going to carry on the services. So yeah, this is one very famous quote from Alan Cooper. If you guys have heard of this person, like, he created the Visual Basic, like, and when Alan Cooper, like, when he started off, like, when he started, like, all the systems and everything looked very much like a machine. Like, you had machines, like, which just like is like, numbers and, like, text. So there was nothing likable about it. Like, you're constantly looking into, like, yeah. So, like, a little bit of history on what exactly UX design looks like. Back in 1982, like, if you'd have used, any computer or any systems, like, it would look something like this. Like, when I say something like this, like, it will just have text and numbers. And, like, when you want to retrieve something, when you want to do something, it kind of, have to take, it kind of has to, like, you have to type out the full query to get a reply. And, in 1984, the systems kind of changed. Like, there was this introduction of something called graphic user interface, which was introduced in Macintosh in 1984 when Steve Jobs was in Apple. So that kind of changed the way, like, we interacted with systems. Like, there was a mouse which came in, like, where you can do drag and drop, where you can, like, where you have, like, a menu system which kind of comes right below. And then, like, whatever actions, like, we do in the real world, like, let's say you want to put something into a trash, you just throw it into the trash. So the dragging and dropping option into the trash came in then, so those kind of things, like, because the Macintosh kind of started taking the system, like, from numbers and words, to a little bit more graphical, how we see the real world. They use a lot of real world examples, like, how the trash can would look, how a folder would look like, all the icons, what you see are all from that kind of an era. And that you can see that, like, those metaphors are still being carried forward, in the current scenario as well. If you see the current icons, we still use a trash can for we still use a trash can for, like, throwing things, And then like, for keynote, like, it is still a podium which is being used. I mean, nobody presents on a podium these days, but still like, those kind of metaphors are still carried forward, but they have like, improvised and like, stuck with it in a longer time. And, I mean, suddenly like, from when we look at like, from software design to this particular quote, like, what makes a good design, like, because we have seen the previous part, like, hey, the design has moved from like, text and numbers to a graphical interface, but ultimately like, it has to kind of look good, like, it can't be it 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 can't be like, just mimicking the real world, and like, it can't do much about it. So basically a lot of the design inspiration came from like, Dieter Rams. A honest design communicates solely the functions and the value it offers. It does not attempt to manipulate buyers and users with a promise it can't keep. This is a very famous quote by Dieter Rams. And have you guys heard of this particular person? Okay. So, and why, and this one question comes across, so who is this guy and why is he important, in the UX part of the world? So a very simple thing, like, if you look at all the Apple designs, like, they're kind of inspired from his particular design. So this is a pocket radio, what he has designed, back then in 1958. And if you can see like, a lot of visual similarities between like, what he has designed and like, what has come in from Apple. And then if you look at the calculator is almost direct replica of like, what he has designed for Braun, back in the years. Same with the Macintosh, uh, the Big Mac they used to call it. So like, probably this is a very interesting thing. Like, this particular guy inspired the other guy. I'm damn sure you know the other person. Have you guys, I mean, I'm damn like, I hope everybody in the room knows Jobs. Yeah. Okay. And this guy changed the way like, we interact with systems forever. How did he go about doing it? He applied the design theory. He applied like, how the design thinking into every aspect. Like, I'll probably talk about a very lesser known example, like, what has actually happened. If you look at the Apple, if you go back and look into the Apple website, there are a lot of archives back in time. He moved out of the company in 1987. And then like, Apple started having the web kind of came into predominance in the early 90s, like, 91, 92, 93. When you looked at 96 or 97, the Apple website actually looked somewhat like this. So it basically like, was changing every year drastically. It didn't had a consistency. It didn't have anything like, back like, what a user would be looking for. And for example, like, if you look at the current uh, if you look at the current website versus like, what was there in 97, it's very drastically different. But this is right after that, like, the next year when like, Steve Jobs kind of joins back Apple. And then like, the impact what he has created, like, in the design of everything. If you still see, there are a lot of elements in this particular part, what is being created are being carried forward almost, 2 decades ahead. Like, we are in 2021. You would still see Apple using like, some components from this. Probably like, a 1 year shift, like, if a designer kind of comes into the play is this much. And this is what, like, I just took the screenshot, like, a couple of hours back, like, when I was preparing for the presentation. So you would be able to see like, the consistency what they've kind of maintained, like, the black bar, to show the black bar to show the top areas are like, are still being like, maintained at a high level. And then if you see like, the elements are still being carried forward, be it the search, be it the online buying, be it these kind of like, carrying forward elements. So, and like, how do we start creating a design, like, how do we, where do we start? We should start off by learning the basics of user experience. And what are the basics? Like, first being the elements of user experience. Second is the design process, design element, design principle, soft skill, user research basics, a little bit of like, iOS and Android frameworks, because that would kind of help you, like, when you're going to build your design, like, it has to be rooted at something. It has to look like something similar, right? So to start off with, I feel like, iOS and Android frameworks are good. And the last and the most important thing, like, you're going to do as a designer is like, you're just going to sit silently, and observe the world around you, and just do thinking. I think the quote is a cool. So what exactly is a design process? So design process is nothing but like, there are multiple design process. The moment you Google something called the design process, you will hear a lot of you will come across a lot of different kind of diagrams. But this is the most predominant, like, mostly used diagram, which is used, in the industry or when you're in design schools. So one is, this is called as a double diamond, design process, because it kind of represents two diamonds, like, put together. So there are four different stages of design process. One is like, discover, define, develop, and deliver. And there is the evolve phase, like, where you again start from the discover, define, develop, like, into multiple parts. So the discover phase is nothing but like, your user research, like, whatever you're going to do, the interviews, your questionnaires, your documentation, your meetings, your observations, whatever you're going to carry out. The define phase is basically like, you take all the learnings, what you had outside in the field, the documentation, meetings, and the interviews, then you're going to put them together in a board, into a room, and then going to discuss, like, all the ideas, like, with your teammates. Like, it could be your developer, it could be your product manager, like, it could be, anybody. Like, this is where you're going to frame those, like, those important things, what you want to focus on, those important elements, like, what are the goals of the design is going to be, like, what are the opportunities you're kind of found through this. And you're going to talk about the stories, what you've heard, about your customers or the, users you have met. Then the third stage is actually develop. So develop is like, where you basically, like, this happens, like, in two ways. One is for the initial stages of develop, like, you're going to either partner with your, product teams, developer, and everyone, and then going to, sketch out things. Then, as a designer, like, you would go into basically creating those things. So that's where your actual UX work kind of comes into place, where you would think about, like, hey, what are the tactical pieces it's going to go into, and how the visualization of the designs are going to be. And then the next part is basically the design delivery. The design delivery is nothing but, you're going to deliver the design, like, how you're going to deliver the design is going to be very important. For example, like, sometimes, like, designers do a prototype. Sometimes, like, people present their designs in a PPT. Sometimes, like, designers actually, like, people who are from a coding background, they would actually code and give a HTML, like, full-fledged front-end version of it. Or it could be like, let's say that you're working on some project, like, which doesn't have a interface element to it. It is just a completely a systems design, so in that case, like, you would actually give you a set of notes or a plan diagram or things like that. So then evolve is basically nothing but like, hey, you have created all this, how well, like, your designs are performing, and how are you going to scale them? Like, is there any other elements, is there any other parts you want to bring it in? Okay, cool. And then, like, the second part, the evolve kind of builds, like, let's say that you've built a minimum viable product, like, from there, how are you going to scale your product? How are you going to plan the next steps of your product design? Like, are you going to go back and talk to users again and do the same process all over again? Or are you going to, like, cut across the steps and, like, directly jump into, like, defining, or directly jump into the develop phases and, like, do things? Yeah. So, and do we have any questions? I saw a question somewhere. If someone knows.
Rahul, we do have a few questions, but we can take them at a later point. No worries.
Okay, cool. Probably I'll take all your questions in the end, guys. Is it okay? Okay. So elements of user experience. This is a very famous diagram, like where you would see what are the elements which consist of a user experience. One is basically hey, you're going to talk about user needs and site objectives, which is nothing but when you're actually going to go talk to the users, they're going to tell you their problems, they're going to talk about what are the what is the problem they're facing with your current experience, or the experience is not there, what are the kind of concerns they have to use your product. The second part is the functional specifications and the content requirements. Functional specifications in a very, very simple way, think of it hey, is it going to be used on the phone, is it going to be used on a tablet, is it going to be used on the system, and the the interaction design, the information architecture is nothing but hey, I have the user needs, I have the functional requirements, I'm going to use it on the phone. But in a phone, I can't create something which is going to be 20 page or 30 page long. I have to create something which has to be fitting into the phone landscape, and it has to happen the whole action has to happen in the phone. In that particular place is where you're going to design the architecture. That's where you're going to design the interaction patterns. Then the second last layer, which is the second layer of it, which is the interface design, navigation design, and information design. So these are nothing but when you talk about interface design or navigation design, hey, when I'm going to click on a back button, is it going to go back to my home screen, or is it going to go back to my previous screen? Or when I click on the home button, what should happen? Should it close my app, or should it go to my home screen? So these are the kind of decisions you're going to take at this particular level. Sometimes you would see certain apps, you would have heard of this terminology called pull to refresh, or if you're using WhatsApp, you will see the scroller, when you click on an image, it kind of scrolls and shows you that. So those kind of decisions are taken at at this particular level. And then the last part of it is the communication design and the typography, which is basically the visual design. Hey, what color my button should be in, and what kind of text it should carry, it should either are you going to say register, or are you going to say sign up, which would work better for my design. So those are the kind of calls what you're going to take in the first layer, which is the visual design layer. So a little detailed version of the same part is here, probably you guys can just Google this terminology, you will get this diagram. So whatever I spoke, probably it's explained in a little bit more detailed way. And then the second part is the elements of design. Elements of design, these are basic graphic design, elements of design. I mean, if anybody's a graphic designer, they would have learned all these things in their designs college, or or in the design schools. So the elements of design is nothing but it helps you build your design. It starts off from line, shape, space, size, texture, and value. So when I say line, line is the core of everything you're going to do. When you're going to create an icon, when you're going to do something, it's going to be a combination of lines and shapes together. And then let's say that you have a gradation, you have a color which is applied on the logo, that is going to be the value. And then the texture, hey, when I'm looking at a certain particular design, what kind of a texture, what kind of a thing it is going to emulate, so you would have seen this certain apps have this neomorphic design. There's a terminology called neomorphic design. Neomorphic design is nothing but replicating the real world examples of how it kind of happens. So if any of you guys are familiar with apps like Cred, or anything, or any other Mac apps, they use a lot of neomorphic designs in their day-to-day design terminology. And then the size, hey, what is the size of your button, what is the size of your what is the size of your text, all those things. These are all very basic levels which you need to be aware of when you're going to start your design, because the feedback what you're going to get is something like this: hey, can we increase the space around it, I don't see this value working very well. So, and then the other part is the design principles. So design principles are nothing but hey, you got a certain set of design elements, but how are you going to put them together? Like, there are multiple design principles, that are around 7, 8, but these are the most common ones in use. Like, for example, let's say, hey, you're going to have, let's say that, like, you take up a ticket booking site, like, it has to have one below the other, tickets has to be stacked, and like, that is called repetition. Like, you can't have some part of the design, like, put in the right hand side, and some part of the design can't be put in the left hand side, like, so that's where these kind of design principles come into place. So design principles, like, you would be somewhere, like, would be knowing them, like, subconsciously, like, if you have used something like, let's say, like, PowerPoint or Excel or Word, you would have done this, like, subconsciously. For example, like, you would have justified your text. You would, I mean, justification is nothing but, like, without any space, like, it's called, like, when you justify a text, it's called justifying the text. So then you would have right aligned the text, left aligned the text, you would have done all this, and then, like, you would have changed colors, you would have, played with arrow marks, shapes and everything. And proximity is nothing but, like, if you see, like, which is going to be in the front, which is going to be in the back, so if you look at the Apple website, like, hey, this is the first element, this is the second element, this is the third element. And, like, how closer, for example, the price has to be closer to the name, like, it can't be closer to the phone, because then people tend to miss out this, like, so this is basically something called as proximity. And the buy button has to be, like, closer to after the price, because immediately, like, I'm going to take a call. So let's say if I move the buy button right below the phone, I might not get the traction what I'm actually looking for. Why? Because it's like, hey, I'm reading the information this way, I'm looking at, like, phone, I'm looking at, hey, how much it's going to cost. Now I want to decide, like, when I mean, like, should I want to buy it, or, like, I might be kind of, or I might be kind of lost in the way, like, if I move the buy button below. So principles, and then the soft skills required, like, what are the kind of soft skills required? Like, you can, I mean, any software is good right now, like, every software kind of gives you a certain set of, tools. All the tools are very similar, like, you can create mocks in anything you want, but I would suggest, like, you should at least master one tool, like, which can help you design, and one tool for prototyping, because prototyping becomes a very core part as these days, like, because when you're going to communicate your design, like, prototype actually helps you communicate in a much better and a faster way. And, like, some softwares kind of combine these two things together. For example, if you look at Azure or XD or Figma, even some parts of, like, Sketch kind of, like, helps you prototype, within the design software itself. So you can actually, like, without, like, jumping into different things, like, you can actually like, learn one software and have the benefit of both. And the last part is, like, being aware of a certain set of guidelines. Like, if you're going to work in any company which is going to do a design, they'll have something called as company-wide guidelines or a design guidelines, what they would want to work with. The design guidelines are nothing but, like, a set of rules and things like, hey, how icon should look, how the text field should be, like, how the design should come together. So these kind of things are called, design guidelines. So, and iOS has their own design guidelines called human interface guidelines, and Android has their own guidelines called material design. It would be worthwhile to check out these things, like, if you're a designer who are starting to design things, to understand, like, hey, how these guys have come up with the design components. I mean, what are the components, like, what are the detail level, like, each and every element, like, how they have defined these things. And, why these rules are important is basically, let's say that, like, you're designing something, your first page and the second page should not look very different, drastically different. Like, it should look like it belongs to one family. So for that, like, kind of the guideline kind of helps you, like, arrive at that one kind of a grammar for your whole app. Yeah. And then, are we on time, Shama?
We have about 15 more minutes left for the Q&A.
Okay. I just have a quick video. I don't know whether you guys have seen it or not. It's just a quick, like, 2-minute video I'll play, and then probably we'll move on to the last set of slides and finish. This is again a Apple video on how they design, and I think one very interesting quote for me was from this was for every S, you would actually say 1,000 no's. In design, that kind of becomes a very crucial factor. So probably I'll end with a certain set of such slides, I know these kind of questions kind of come to me in every talk, everywhere I go, where exactly are the jobs placed? Hey, I am placed at XYZ location, are the jobs available in my location? Currently, there are, we have all become, everybody is working remotely, especially from the past 1 year. So the jobs are everywhere, I would say. But the most of the the design companies are located in these locations, either in Delhi, Gurgaon, Noida, you know, Bangalore being predominantly the design space, for the UX design jobs. And the second most question what I get asked is, what are the salary? How much will I get paid? This is not my data, guys. This is not my interpretation. This is the UX design salaries according to LinkedIn. There could be a 30% above or lesser on this, but somewhere around this is the range, and you guys can actually go to LinkedIn and check this out. And this is the kind of UX design salaries which every company, in every other country in the world kind of has. And again, this is again from the internet. This would have variations based on the context, and I'll just drop this actually a bunch of links and the books and the designers I follow. I would want to drop it to you guys. I'll probably share it in the end of the session. And yeah, time for Q&A.
Thank you for delivering a brilliant session, Rahul. Really great insights. We already have questions lined up for you as you see in the Q&A window.
Yeah.
Give me a moment to share my screen. Yes, so audience, here's your chance to talk to Rahul and ask your questions and get your answers to how to transition to a product design role. So let's start with the questions in the Q&A window. Let's see the first one. What type of projects should my portfolio showcase to get a job as a research analyst?
Okay. A research analyst is going to be a very specific role in a very specific team. If I roughly have to say, there are very less research analyst jobs available in India, because currently what happens is the researcher kind of doubles as analyst. They actually go in the field, then they actually do the analyzation of the research. So one of the ways what you can build your projects is you can actually Google a lot of big companies kind of publish their researchers. They kind of publish their open-ended researchers and the interviews, for my people. We can actually take those researchers and look into analyzing them, and then what are the 2-3 elements as a researcher, we call them researchers. We don't have specific roles in research analysts in India. I've worked in 2 big companies Microsoft and Amazon. We don't have a specific role for a research analyst, especially in the UX design part of things. The portfolio should kind of showcase hey, what value it can bring into the business, and what are the blind spots the business is turning eye to. And one of the major important things what is what are the paper cuts, and what are the places the business should kind of focus on. So I would as a research analyst, that's what your core job is, to bring in that particular value, where your business leaders and everybody is not able to see while doing these interviews. I hope I answered your question. Okay. Cool. Let me move on to the next question. If someone...
Yes, I'll do that. I'll read it out. If someone knows or creating wireframes and prototypes, that means UX designer, or to know the whole process, example, user personas, user journey, map, empathy, map, and or so. Okay, Shoaib, Sheikh Sure. Would you like to come online and ask a question? It's not quite clear what you're trying to say here, but please, audience, a reminder, you can raise your hands and I can unmute you. You can have a live interaction with Rahul. Jump to the next question by Jinesh. Does the UX designer need to have any coding knowledge? I work as a motion graphic designer, so is it going to be an added advantage or not?
Yeah, so you actually don't require coding knowledge, currently in the current scenario, because a lot of softwares give you that, ready to pick up code, the front end code to a certain extent. And motion graphic designer actually, is a very huge. It brings in a lot of huge value because a lot of the complex interfaces what we design, we actually will not be able to even prototype it and show. Like, let's say that you have like a 30-page flow or a 40-page flow. Let's say you can take example of the passport application, which is like I was filling it the other day. It was like a 15 page flow. Imagine if you have to explain that to a certain set of an audience, it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be like a 1.5 hour meeting. So in that place, a motion graphic, a motion designer kind of comes in and creates that kind of a video or a prototype for them. And that's a huge value, especially if you look at in companies like Microsoft or Amazon or any other place. You should probably pursue that.
Rahul, let's take this next question by Sharan. He has raised his hand.
Okay.
Sharan, please come online and ask your question.
Hey, hi Rahul. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're audible.
Hey Rahul, thank you for the amazing session. Actually, I am a UX designer. Just as a fresher, just have joined the industry, last year. Just graduated as a bachelor in UX design, right? So thank you for answering my question on the research analyst. The reason why I asked that question was I really want to transition into like a full-time research role, even though I love the visual, design aspect of it, but I really want to, delve more into the research side of the UX design process, which is why I asked you that question. So maybe research analyst might not be the right designation maybe, but how can I add more research oriented projects in my portfolio rather than less visual projects to get that type of a role?
So what you can do is, if you're already working as a user experience designer, what you can do is you can take your designs, test them out with real users, and then probably start off with usability. That would be the very straightforward, easiest thing to start off with.
Right.
Start with usability sessions. Then you can slowly graduate into creating open-ended interviews or hypothetical interviews. So first is you have to if you're familiar with the process, if you're going to do a usability, you have to create a task sheet and a bunch of questions, and the questioners keep refining. Your initial 4 or 5 interviews are going to be either yes or no answers and straightforward answers on people will not be able to open. But after 4 or 5, we have typically seen that your questions also would refine a lot, and then you would actually bring in that. So you can start off with testing out your current user experiences or the UX what you create with usability. Then slowly you can translate. As you do a bunch of usability sessions, probably if you do 10 usability sessions with 10 different set of people, then you can go into open-ended kind of questions, hey, we call them hypothetical interviews, or or exploratory interviews. Exploratory interviews are nothing but hey, we're going to explore multiple areas and we're going to see hey, can we get some solutions out of this?
Right. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Sharan, for that question.
Makes sense.
Thank you for
Yeah.
coming
Thank you so
online.
much, Rahul.
Thanks, Sharan.
So we'll take this next question from Amrita. What software is the most required one in UX UI design jobs?
Actually, this, I think I should have added it in my this one. So there is no one design software which is actually required. So this is basically very similar. It's similar, if you know handwriting, you can write anywhere. Softwares are for example, let's say that when I started working, Photoshop was the most predominant software actually used. Few years down the lane, it became Illustrator. Then Illustrator became Dreamweaver. Then slowly we translated into Azure into Sketch, now into Figma. Probably down the lane we might actually move out of Figma and like, come into different softwares as well. So the softwares keep changing and keep evolving. What's more important is actually like, I mean, you should know the basic usability of it, but most of the design softwares have a very common set of usability parameters, so learning one software, you would actually be able to use, multiple software. Like actually, if you use something like Figma or Sketch, it is very, very simple, very, very easy. If you have used PowerPoint, you would be able to operate almost 50-60% of it.
All right. So we have Ayushi wanting to ask a question. Ayushi, please come online and ask your question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Hi, thanks for this insightful session. So my question is, to progress further in a senior level for a product design role, do I have to get into quantitative data analysis as well? Say, because currently my organization uses amplitude mixed panel, and I feel, I do a lot of user research, user testing. I feel, if I'll be able to combine those two, I can get to results faster, or maybe at least get to problem statements faster. So do you think that helps, or like, because I don't know how to use this tool, so I have to get to my product managers again and again for the data?
Okay, so you want to grow as a user researcher, or what role you are actually want to go into? That part is not very clear for me. Probably I missed that out.
Yeah, product design manager. I want to scale to that.
Okay, you want to scale to a product design manager. So for a product design manager, the core skills are actually going to be the business value and the business metrics, what you're going to bring in. So, if you're going to get into analysis, what typically would happen is you would be put into a little bit more, you will be pulled more towards analyst role, then actually looking into the data. So it's kind of okay to learn the basics of it and look into it. But what I would actually focus on is hey, I've spoken to a bunch of users, how do I present this, the data, what I have in a much better way, and how can I pull out insights from the data? The number game actually, what happens is it kind of goes into a business analyst role, then into a product management role. So we actually have how much of a deeper you're going to go into the number game, you would not be able to do that much depth as a business analyst. His or her core job is going to be analyzing the data.
Right. So that means that if I have to, and that's specific just to the product design managers, and the role where you said that, you can collate the qualitative data. Sorry,
Yeah.
qualitative data, right?
Yeah.
So that scales to which kind of role?
So that's again business analyst, senior business analyst, then they'll go into the program manager kind of a role where you would actually go into if you're going to go into the data level thinking, because so then what would happen is you would be working and crunching data, you would actually be going into a program role of things. So the product role would focus more on the users, the user stories, how are you going to actually make more people use your product.
I see. And the other role which you are saying where, you can, where you said that you can collate how you can best represent that user, whatever the data is.
That's a senior user researcher or a principal researcher or anybody, it's a pure research role, but it is more focused, towards, it's more focused towards the,
user research data types thing. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ayushi, for your question. Rahul, if you see the first few questions, I mean, we have a lot of audiences coming from a beginner level here. So they have questions similar to where do I start, or what course or tool do I start with, or if the UX design certificate is worthy for a start career as a UX designer. I mean, could you just briefly go through it, the questions and answer in one, probably we will not be able to take as many questions. So if you could conclude with that.
So, see, one way of looking at this is, guys, like, where do you want to start is basically like, I would say, take up a problem, take up a everyday problem, what you actually have, and then like, start thinking about redesigning it. Like, you don't need design softwares, you don't need anything else. Just do them very rough and badly in PowerPoint. Just put them together and then see like, hey, if your design has to be, let's say that you take, for example, Book My Show or like, a train booking experience or IRCTC, and how you actually like, you're going to change that particular IRCTC experience into a certain experience. That itself would kind of get you start thinking on like, thinking like a UX designer and stuff. And the certificates and the courses, it is worthy to a certain level because it familiarizes the term, it familiarizes with like, how other people kind of work. I mean, what the industry standards are. Those things are very important when you're actually going to go into a job. But like, I would not stress upon a one particular certificate or one particular course, for that matter. So because all the courses, everything would familiarize with you on this, probably like, whatever, whatever like, would actually like, work, for you guys. Like, there are a lot of open certifications. There are a lot of paid certifications. I would say like, first is like, explore, look at multiple examples, speak to your seniors and like, friends, anybody like, who's actually doing the UX design part. And then like, then you can take up a certain set of courses and stuff. I would say like, start off with a little bit of like open-ended courses, then you can go into the closed-ended courses, like, for a certification or something like that. Because what we have seen is like, when you go into a certification or something, like you should not do it for the certificate level, like, because what is valued a lot more in the industry is actually your portfolio. Because, very rarely, like, people actually look at those certificates or things like that. The one thing what people look at is your portfolio, how well, how rich, like, how detailed you've taught on your portfolio.
Sure. So there are a few more questions in the Q&A window, but sorry, folks, in view of the time constraints, we will have to conclude today's session. But like I mentioned before, please go ahead and book your 30-minute session for a one-on-one discussion with our faculty or Rahul. Rahul is also a faculty at the Institute of Product Leadership, and get your questions answered. Now, before we move on to the next part, the final part of the session, audience, I encourage you all to take the feedback form posted in the chat window. Let us know your experience with this session and different ways or other topics that you would want us to cover in the upcoming sessions. It'd be of great help. So please take a few minutes to share the feedback. Now, the concluding part, thank you, Rahul. We have enjoyed having you with us, and it's been a complete pleasure. We are grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and amazing insights drawn from your years of research and experience in the industry.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys. Like, thanks a lot for taking out time and joining, like, it's 10:30. Good night. Have a good time. Yeah.
Oh, it was a very insightful session, Rahul. I mean, I'm sure our audience will benefit from the methods that you suggested and get ahead in their career.
Yeah. Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either IPL or me. Like, I mean, I can answer or Shama can answer. I mean, like, yeah. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you, audience, for joining in and making this session a huge success. Design career is not a subject that you can get answers to within an hour. And hence, we have made various platforms available to address all your queries. Reach out to us on our website and detailed information on the ICUX Flex program, or you can send an email to us at engage@ipl.edu.in. Do not miss out on the opportunity for the normal scholarship, guys. Please enroll right now. And with that, I conclude tonight's session. Happy learning, stay skilled, and have a great night.